Matthew Henry Bible Commentary 2 Kings Book of 2 Kings chapter 10 we have in this chapter a further account of Jehu's execution of his commission. He cut off 1. All Ahab's sons, ver 1 to 10. 2. All Ahab's kindred, ver 11 to 14, 17. 3. Ahab's idolatry. His zeal against this he took Jonadab to be witness to, version 15, 16, summoned all the worshippers of Baal to attend, ver 18 to 23, and slew them all, version 24, 25, and then abolished that idolatry, ver 26 to 28. 2. A short account of the administration of his government. 1. The old idolatry of Israel, the worship of the calves, was retained, ver 29 to 31. 2. This brought God's judgments upon them by Hazael, with which his reign concludes, ver 32 to 36. Death of Ahab's sons, the death of Ahaziah's brethren, 884 BC. One in Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. And Jehu wrote letters, and sent to Samaria, unto the rulers of Jezreel, to the elders, and to them that brought up Ahab's children, saying, To now as soon as this letter cometh to you, seeing your master's sons are with you. And there are with you chariots and horses, a fenced city also, and armor. 3 look even at the best and meetest of your master's sons, and set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house. But they were exceedingly afraid, and said, Behold, 2 kings stood not before him. How then shall we stand? 5. And he that was over the house, and he that was over the city, the elders also, and the bringers up of the children, sent to Jehu, saying, We are thy servants, and will do all that thou shalt bid us. We will not make any king. Do thou that which is good in thine eyes. 6. Then he wrote a letter the second time to them, saying, If ye be mine, and if ye will hearken unto my voice, take ye the heads of the men your master's sons, and come to me to Jezreel by tomorrow this time. Now the king's sons, being 70 persons, were with the great men of the city, which brought them up. 7. And it came to pass, when the letter came to them, that they took the king's sons, and slew 70 persons, and put their heads in baskets, and sent him them to Jezreel. 8. And there came a messenger, and told him, saying, They have brought the heads of the king's sons. And he said, Lay ye them in 2 heaps at the entering in of the gate until the morning. 9. And it came to pass in the morning, that he went out, and stood, and said to all the people, Ye be righteous. Behold, I conspired against my master, and slew him, but who slew all these? 10 Know now that there shall fall unto the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spake concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord hath done that which he spake by his servant Elijah. 11 So Jehu slew all that remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, and all his great men, and his kinsfolks, and his priests, until he left him none remaining. 12 And he arose and departed, and came to Samaria. And as he was at the shearing house in the way, 13 Jehu met with the brethren of Ahaziah king of Judah, and said, Who are ye? And they answered, We are the brethren of Ahaziah, and we go down to salute the children of the king and the children of the queen. 14 And he said, Take them alive. And they took them alive, and slew them at the pit of the shearing house, even 42 men. Neither left he any of them. We left Jehu in quiet possession of Jezreel, triumphing over Joram and Jezebel, and we must now attend his further motions. He knew the whole house of Ahab must be cut off, and therefore proceeded in this bloody work, and did not do it deceitfully, or by halves. Jah 48:10. He got the heads of all the sons of Ahab cut off by their own guardians at Samaria. 70 sons, or grandsons, Ahab had, Gideon's number, Judge 8:30. In such a number that bore his name his family was likely to be perpetuated, and yet it is extirpated all at once. Such a quiver full of arrows could not protect his house from divine vengeance. Numerous families, if vicious, must not expect to be long prosperous. These sons of Ahab were now at Samaria, a strong city, perhaps brought thither upon occasion of the war with Syria, as a place of safety, or upon notice of Jehu's insurrection. With them were the rulers of Jezreel, that is, the great officers of the court, who went to Samaria to secure themselves or to consult what was to be done. Those of them that were yet under tuition had their tutors with them, who were entrusted with their education and learning, agreeable to their birth and quality, but it is to be feared, brought them up in the idolatries of their father's house, and made them all worshippers of Baal. Jehu did not think fit to bring his forces to Samaria to destroy them, but that the hand of God might appear the more remarkably in it, made their guardians their murderers. 1. He sent a challenge to their friends to stand by them. V. 2. 3. You that are hearty well-wishers to the house of Ahab, and entirely in its interests, now is your time to appear for it. Samaria is a strong city. You're in possession of it. You have forces at command. You may choose out the likeliest person of all the royal family to head you. You know you are not tied to the eldest, unless he be the best and meetest of your master's sons. If you have any spirit in you, show it and set one of them on his father's throne, and stand by him with your lives and fortunes. Not that he desired they should do this, or expected they would, but thus he upbraided them with their cowardice and utter inability to contest with the divine counsels. Do if you dare, and see what will come of it. Those that have forsaken their religion have often, with it, lost both their sense and their courage, and deserve to be upbraided with it. 2. Hereby he gained from them a submission. They prudently reasoned with themselves. Behold, 2 kings stood not before him, but fell as sacrifices to his rage. How then shall we stand? V. 4. Therefore they sent him a surrender of themselves. We are thy servants, thy subjects, and will do all that thou shalt bid us, right or wrong, and will set up nobody in competition with thee. They saw it was to no purpose to contend with him, and therefore it was their interest to submit to him. With much more reason may we thus argue ourselves into a subjection to the great God. Many kings and great men have fallen before his wrath for their wickedness, and how then shall we stand? Do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? No, we must either bend or break. 3. This was improved so far as to make them the executioners of those whom they had the tuition of. V. 6. If you be mine, bring me the heads of your master's sons by tomorrow at this time. Though he knew it must be done, and was loath to do it himself, one would think he could not expect they should do it. Could they betray such a trust? Could they be cruel to their master's sons? It seems, so low did they stoop in their adoration to the rising sun that they did it. They cut off the heads of those 70 princes, and sent them in baskets a present to Jehu. V. 7. Learn hence not to trust in a friend nor to put confidence in a guide not governed by conscience. One can scarcely expect that he who has been false to his God should ever be faithful to his prince. But observe God's righteousness in their unrighteousness. These elders of Jezreel had been wickedly obsequious to Jezebel's order for the murder of Naboth, 1 Kings 21:11. She gloried, it is likely, in the power she had over them, and now this same base spirit makes them as pliable to Jehu and as ready to obey his orders for the murder of Ahab's sons. Let none aim at arbitrary power, lest they be found rolling a stone which, some time or other, will return upon them. Princes that make their people slaves take the readiest way to make them rebels, and by forcing men's consciences, as Jezebel did, they lose their hold of them. When the separated heads were presented to Jehu, he slyly upbraided those that were the executioners of this vengeance. The heads were laid in 2 heaps at the gate, the proper place of judgment. There he acquitted the people before God and the world. V. 9. You are righteous, and, by what the rulers of Samaria had now done, comparatively acquitted himself. I slew but one. They have slain all these. I did it by conspiracy and with design. They have done this merely in compliance and with an implicit obedience. Let not the people of Samaria, nor any of the friends of the house of Ahab, ever reproach me for what I have done, when their own elders and the very guardians of the orphans have done this. It is common for those who have done something base to attempt the mitigation of their own reproach by drawing others in to do something worse. But, 2. He resolves all into the righteous judgment of God. V. 10. The Lord hath done that which he spoke by Elijah. God is not the author of any man's sin, but even by that which men do from bad principles God serves his own purposes and glorifies his own name, and he is righteous in that wherein men are unrighteous. When the Assyrian is made the rod of God's anger, and the instrument of his justice, he meaneth not so. Neither does his heart think so. Isa 10:7. 2. He proceeded to destroy all that remained of the house of Ahab, not only those that descended from him, but those that were in any relation to him, all the officers of his household, ministers of state, and those in command under him. Called here as great men, v. V11, all his kinsfolks and acquaintance, who had been partners with him in his wickedness, and his priests or domestic chaplains, whom he employed in his idolatrous services, and who strengthened his hand that he should not turn from his evil way. Having done this in Jezreel, he did the same in Samaria. V17, slew all that remained to Ahab in Samaria. This was bloody work, and is not now, in any case, to be drawn into a precedent. Let the guilty suffer, but not the guiltless for their sakes. Perhaps such terrible destructions as these were intended as types of the final destruction of all the ungodly. God has a sword, bathed in heaven, which will come down upon the people of his curse and be filled with blood. Isa 34:5-6. Then his eye will not spare, neither will he pity. 3. Providence bringing the brethren of Ahaziah in his way. As he was going on with this execution, he slew them likewise. V. 12-14. The brethren of Ahaziah were slain by the Arabians, 2 Chron 22:1. But these were the sons of his brethren, as it is there explained. V. 8. And they are said to be princes of Judah and to minister to Ahaziah. Several things concurred to make them obnoxious to the vengeance Jehu was now executing. 1. They were branches of Ahab's house, being descended from Athaliah, and therefore fell within his commission. 2. They were tainted with the wickedness of the house of Ahab. 3. They were now going to make their court to the princes of the house of Ahab, to salute the children of the king and the queen, Joram and Jezebel, which showed that they were linked to them in affection as well as in affinity. These princes, 42 in number, being appointed as sheep for the sacrifice, were slain with solemnity at the pit of the shearing house. The Lord is known by these judgments which he executeth. Interview between Jehu and Jehonadab, the worshippers of Baal destroyed, 884 BC. 15. And when he was departed thence, he lighted on Jehonadab the son of Rechab coming to meet him, and he saluted him, and said to him, Is thine heart right, as my heart is with thy heart? And Jehonadab answered, It is. If it be, give me thine hand. And he gave him his hand, and he took him up to him into the chariot. 16. And he said, Come with me, and see my zeal for the Lord. So they made him ride in his chariot. 17. And when he came to Samaria, he slew all that remained unto Ahab in Samaria, till he had destroyed him, according to the saying of the Lord, which he spake to Elijah. 18. And Jehu gathered all the people together, and said unto them, Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu shall serve him much. 19. Now therefore call unto me all the prophets of Baal, all his servants, and all his priests. Let none be wanting. For I have a great sacrifice to do to Baal. Whosoever shall be wanting, he shall not live. But Jehu did it in subtlety, to the intent that he might destroy the worshippers of Baal. 20. And Jehu said, Proclaim a solemn assembly for Baal. And they proclaimed it. 21. And Jehu sent through all Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left that came not. And they came into the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was full from one end to another. 22. And he said unto him that was over the vestry, Bring forth vestments for all the worshippers of Baal. And he brought them forth vestments. 23. And Jehu went, and Jehonadab the son of Rechab, into the house of Baal, and said unto the worshippers of Baal, Search, and look that there be here with you none of the servants of the Lord, but the worshippers of Baal only. 24. And when they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings, Jehu appointed 80 men without, and said, If any of the men whom I have brought into your hands escape, he that letteth him go, his life shall be for the life of him. 25. And it came to pass, as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, that Jehu said to the guard and to the captains, Go in and slay them, let none come forth. And they smote them with the edge of the sword, and the guard and the captains cast them out, and went to the city of the house of Baal. 26. And they brought forth the images out of the house of Baal, and burned them. 27. And they brake down the image of Baal, and brake down the house of Baal, and made it a draught house unto this day. 28. Thus Jehu destroyed Baal out of Israel. Jehu, pushing on his work, is here, courting the friendship of a good man, Jehonadab the son of Rechab, v. 15:16. This Jehonadab, though mortified to the world and meddling little with the business of it, as appears by his charge to his posterity, which they religiously observed 300 years after, not to drink wine nor dwell in cities, J 35:6, etc. Yet, upon this occasion, went to meet Jehu, that he might encourage him in the work to which God had called him. The countenance of good men is a thing which great men, if they be wise, will value and value themselves by. David prayed, Let those that fear thee turn to me. PS 1:1979. This Jehonadab, though no prophet, priest, or Levite, no prince or ruler, was, we may suppose, very eminent for prudence and piety, and generally respected for that life of self-denial and devotion which he lived. Jehu, though a soldier, knew him and honored him. He did not indeed think of sending for him, but when he met him, though it is likely he drove now as furiously as ever, he stopped to speak to him, and we're here told what passed between them. 1. Jehu saluted him. He blessed him, so the word is, paid him the respect and showed him the goodwill that were due to so great an example of serious godliness. 2. Jehonadab assured him that he was sincerely in his interest and a hearty well-wisher to his cause. Jehu professed that his heart was right with him, that he had a true affection for his person and a veneration for the crown of his Nazariteship, and desired to know whether he had the same affection for him and satisfaction in that crown of royal dignity which God had put upon his head. Is thy heart right? A question we should often put to ourselves. I make a plausible profession, have gained a reputation among men, but is my heart right? Am I sincere and inward with God? Jehonadab gave him his word, it is, and gave him his hand as a pledge of his heart, yielded to him, so giving the hand is rendered. 2 Chron 38, concurred and covenanted with him, and owned him in the work both of revenge and of reformation he was now about. 3. Jehu took him up into his chariot and took him along with him to Samaria. He put some honor upon him by taking him into the chariot with him. Jehonadab was not accustomed to ride in a chariot, much less with a king, but he received more honor from him, and from the countenance he gave to his present work. All sober people would think the better of Jehu when they saw Jehonadab in the chariot with him. This was not the only time in which the piety of some has been made to serve the policy of others, and designing men have strengthened themselves by drawing good men into their interests. Jehonadab is a stranger to the arts of fleshly wisdom, and has his conversation in simplicity and godly sincerity, and therefore, if Jehu be a servant of God and an enemy to Baal, he will be his faithful friend. Come then, says Jehu, come with me, and see my zeal for the Lord, and then thou wilt see reason to espouse my cause. This is commonly taken as not well said by Jehu, and as giving cause to suspect that his heart was not right with God in what he did, and that the zeal he pretended for the Lord was really zeal for himself and his own advancement. For 1. He boasted of it, and spoke as if God and man were mightily indebted to him for it. 2. He desired it might be seen and taken notice of, like the Pharisees, who did all to be seen of men. An upright heart approves itself to God and covets no more than his acceptance. If we aim at the applause of men and make their praise our highest end, we are upon a false bottom. Whether Jehu looked any further we cannot judge. However, Jehonadab went with him, and, it is likely, animated and assisted him in the further execution of his commission. 17. Destroying all Ahab's friends in Samaria. A man may hate cruelty and yet love justice, may be far from thirsting after blood, and yet may wash his feet in the blood of the wicked. PS 58:10. 2. Contriving the destruction of all the worshippers of Baal. The service of Baal was the crying sin of the house of Ahab. That root of this idolatry was plucked up, but multitudes yet remained that were infected with it, and would be in danger of infecting others. The law of God was express, that they were to be put to death, but they were so numerous and so dispersed throughout all parts of the kingdom, and perhaps so alarmed with Jehu's beginnings, that it would be a hard matter to find them all out and an endless task to prosecute and execute them one by one. Jehu's project, therefore, is to cut them all off together. 1. By a wile, by a fraud, he brought them together to the temple of Baal. He pretended he would worship Baal more than ever Ahab had done. 18. Perhaps he spoke this ironically, or to try the body of the people whether they would oppose such a resolution as this, and would resent his threatening to increase his predecessor's exactions, and say, if it be so, we have no part in Jehu, nor inheritance in the son of Nimshi. But it rather seems to have been spoken purposely to deceive the worshippers of Baal, and then it cannot be justified. The truth of God needs not any man's lie. He issued a proclamation requiring the attendance of all the worshippers of Baal to join with him in a sacrifice to Baal. 19:20. Not only the prophets and priests, but all, throughout the kingdom, who worshipped Baal, who were not nearly so many as they had been in Elijah's time. Jehu's friends, we may suppose, were aware of what he designed, and were not offended at it, but the bigoted, besotted Baalites began to think themselves very happy, and that now they should see golden days again. Joram had put away the image of Baal, ch 3:2. If Jehu will restore it, they have what they would have, and come up to Samaria with joy from all parts to celebrate the solemnity, and they are pleased to see the house of Baal crowded. 21. To see his priests in their vestments. 22. And themselves perhaps with some badges or other to notify their relation to Baal, for there were vestments for all his worshippers. 2. He took care that none of the servants of the Lord should be among them. 23. This they took as a provision to preserve the worship of Baal from being profaned by strangers, but it was a wonder that they did not, by this, see themselves brought into a snare and discern a design upon them. No marvel if those that suffer themselves to be deceived by Baal, as all idolaters were by their idols, are deceived by Jehu to their destruction. 3. He gave order for the cutting of them all off, and Jehonadab joined with him therein. 23. When a strict search was made lest any of the servants of God should, either for company or curiosity, have got among Thema, lest any wheat should be mixed with those tares, and when 80 men were set to stand guard at all the avenues to Baal's temple, that none might escape. 24. Then the guards were sent in to put them all to the sword, and to mingle their blood with their sacrifices, in a way of just revenge, as they themselves had sometimes done, when, in their blind devotion, they cut themselves with knives and lancets till the blood gushed out. 1 Kings 18:28. This was accordingly done, and the doing of it, though seemingly barbarous, was, considering the nature of their crime, really righteous. The Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. 4. The idolaters being thus destroyed, the idolatry itself was utterly abolished. The buildings about the house of Baal, which were so many and so stately that they are here called a city, where Baal's priests and their families lived, were destroyed. All the little images, statues, pictures, or shrines, which beautified Baal's temple, with the great image of Baal himself, were brought out and burnt. 26:27. And the temple of Baal was broken down, and made a dunghill, the common sink or sewer of the city, that the remembrance of it might be blotted out or made infamous. Thus was the worship of Baal quite destroyed, at least for the present, out of Israel, though it had once prevailed so far that there were but 7,000 of all the thousands of Israel that had not bowed the knee to Baal, and those concealed. Thus will God destroy all the gods of the heathen, and, sooner or later, triumph over them all. Jehu's inconsistency, 884 BC. 29 Howbeit from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, Jehu departed not from after them, to wit, the golden calves that were in Bethel, and that were in Dan 30. And the Lord said unto Jehu, Because thou hast done well in executing that which is right in mine eyes, and hast done unto the house of Ahab according to all that was in mine heart, thy children of the 4th generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. 31 But Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of the Lord God of Israel with all his heart, for he departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, which made Israel to sin. 32 In those days the Lord began to cut Israel short, and Hazael smote them in all the coasts of Israel. 33 From Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites, and the Reubenites, and the Manassites, from Aroer, which is by the river Arnon, even Gilead and Bashan. 34 Now the rest of the acts of Jehu, and all that he did, and all his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? 35 And Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. And Jehoahaz his son reigned in his stead. 36 And the time that Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. Here is all the account of the reign of Jehu, though it continued 28 years. The progress of it answered not to the glory of its beginning. We have here, God's approbation of what Jehu had done. Many, it is probable, censured him as treacherous and barbarous a Euro, called him a rebel, a usurper, a murderer, and prognosticated ill concerning him, that a family thus raised would soon be ruined. But God said, Well done, v. 30. And then it signified little who said otherwise. 1. God pronounced that to be right which he had done. It is justly questionable whether he did it from a good principle, and whether he did not take some false steps in the doing of it. And yet, says God, Thou hast done well in executing that which is right in my eyes. The extirpating of idolaters and idolatry was a thing right in God's eyes, for it is an iniquity he visits as surely and severely as any. It was according to all that was in his heart, all he desired, all he designed. Jehu went through with his work. 2. God promised him a reward, that his children of the 4th generation from him should sit upon the throne of Israel. This was more than what took place in any of the dignities or royal families of that kingdom. Of the house of Ahab there were indeed 4 kings, Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, and Joram, but the last 2 were brothers, so that it reached but to the 3rd generation. And that whole family continued but about 45 years in all, whereas Jehu's continued in 4, besides himself, and in all about 120 years. Note, no services done for God shall go unrewarded. 2. Jehu's carelessness in what he was further to do. By this it appeared that his heart was not right with God, that he was partial in his reformation. 1. He did not put away all the evil. He departed from the sins of Ahab, but not from the sins of Jeroboam, discarded Baal, but adhered to the calves. The worship of Baal was indeed the greater evil, and more heinous in the sight of God. But the worship of the calves was a great evil, and true conversion is not only from gross sin, but from all sinneuro, not only from false gods, but from false worships. The worship of Baal weakened and diminished Israel, and made them beholden to the Sidonians, and therefore he could easily part with that. But the worship of the calves was a politic idolatry, was begun and kept up for reasons of state, to prevent the return of the 10 tribes to the house of David, and therefore Jehu clave to that. True conversion is not only from wasteful sins, but from gainful sincero, not only from those sins that are destructive to the secular interest, but from those that support and befriend it. In forsaking which is the great trial whether we can deny ourselves and trust God. 2. He put away evil, but he did not mind that which was good. v. 31 He took no heed to walk in the law of the Lord God of Israel. He abolished the worship of Baal, but did not keep up the worship of God, nor walk in his law. He had shown great care and zeal for the rooting out of a false religion, but in the true religion, 1. He showed no care, took no heed, lived at large, was not at all solicitous to please God and to do his duty. took no heed to the scriptures, to the prophets, to his own conscience, but walked at all adventures. Those that are heedless, it is to be feared, are graceless. For where there is a good principle in the heart, it will make men cautious and circumspect, desirous to please God and jealous of doing anything to offend him. 2. He showed no zeal. What he did in religion he did not do with his heart, with all his heart, but did it as if he did it not, without any liveliness or concern. It seems he was a man that had little religion himself, and yet God made use of him as an instrument of reformation in Israel. It is a pity, but that those that do good to others should always be good themselves. 3. The judgment that came upon Israel in his reign. We have reason to fear that when Jehu took no heed himself to walk in God's law, the people were generally as careless as he, both in their devotions and in their conversations. There was a general decay of piety and increase of profaneness, and therefore it is not strange that the next news we hear is, in those days the Lord began to cut Israel short. V. 32. Their neighbors encroached upon them on every side. They were short in their duty to God, and therefore God cut them short in their extent, wealth, and power. Hazael king of Syria was, above any other, vexatious and mischievous to them, smote them in all the coasts of Israel, particularly the countries on the other side Jordan, which lay next him, and most exposed. On these he made continual inroads, and laid them waste. Now the Reubenites and Gadites smarted for the choice which their ancestors made of an inheritance on that side Jordan, which Moses reproved them for. Number 32. Now Hazael did what Elisha foresaw and foretold he would do. Yet, for doing it, God had a quarrel with him and with his kingdom, as we may find. Amos 1:3-4. Because those of Damascus have threshed Gilead with threshing instruments of iron, therefore, says God, I will send a fire into the house of Hazael, which shall devour the palaces of Ben-Hadad. Lastly, the conclusion of Jehu's reign, v. 34-36. Notice is taken, in general, of his might, but, because he took no heed to serve God, the memorials of his mighty enterprises and achievements are justly buried in oblivion. Chapter 11. The revolution in the kingdom of Israel was soon perfected in Jehu's settlement. We must now inquire into the affairs of the kingdom of Judah, which lost its head, such as it was, at the same time and by the same hand, as Israel lost its head, but things continued longer there in distraction than in Israel. Yet, after some years, they were brought into a good posture, as we find in this chapter. Athaliah usurps the government and destroys all the seed royal, version 1. 2. Joash, a child of a year old, is wonderfully preserved, version 2, 3. 3. At 6 years' end he is produced, and, by the agency of Jehoiada, made king, verse 4-12. 4. Athaliah is slain, verse 13-16. v. Both the civil and religious interests of the kingdom are well settled in the hands of Joash, verse 17-21. And thus, after some interruption, things returned with advantage into the old channel. The death of Athaliah, 878 BC. 1. And when Athaliah the mother of Ahaziah saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the seed royal. 2. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash the son of Ahaziah, and stole him from among the king's sons which were slain, and they hid him, even him and his nurse, in the bedchamber from Athaliah, so that he was not slain. 3. And he was with her hid in the house of the Lord 6 years. And Athaliah did reign over the land. God had assured David of the continuance of his family, which is called his ordaining a lamp for his anointed, and this cannot but appear a great thing, now that we have read of the utter extirpation of so many royal families, one after another. Now here we have David's promised lamp almost extinguished, and yet wonderfully preserved. It was almost extinguished by the barbarous malice of Athaliah, the queen mother, who, when she heard that her son Ahaziah was slain by Jehu, arose and destroyed all the seed royal, v. 1, all that she knew to be akin to the crown. Her husband Jehoram had slain all his brethren the sons of Jehoshaphat, 2 Chron 21:4. The Arabians had slain all Jehoram's sons except Ahaziah, 2 Chron 22:1. Jehu had slain all their sons, 2 Chron 22:8, and Ahaziah himself. Surely never was royal blood so profusely shed. Happy the men of inferior birth, who live below envy and emulation. But as if all this were but a small matter, Athaliah destroyed all that were left of the seed royal. It was strange that one of the tender sex could be so barbarous, that one who had been herself a king's daughter, a king's wife, and a king's mother, could be so barbarous to a royal family, and a family into which she was herself engrafted. But she did it, one, from a spirit of ambition. She thirsted after rule, and thought she could not get to it any other way. That none might reign with her, she slew even the infants and sucklings that might have reigned after her. For fear of a competitor, not any must be reserved for a successor. 2. From a spirit of revenge and rage against God. The house of Ahab being utterly destroyed, and her son Ahaziah among the rest, because he was akin to it, she resolved, as it were, by way of reprisal, to destroy the house of David and cut off his line. In defiance of God's promise to perpetuate Edo, a foolish attempt and fruitless, for who can disannul what God hath purposed? Grandmothers have been thought more fond of their grandchildren than they were of their own, yet Ahaziah's own mother is the willful murderer of Ahaziah's own sons, and in their infancy too, when she was obliged, above any other, to nurse them and take care of them. Well might she be called Athaliah, that wicked woman, 2 Chron 24:7, Jezebel's own daughter, yet herein God was righteous, and visited the iniquity of Joram and Ahaziah, those degenerate branches of David's house, upon their children. 2. It was wonderfully preserved by the pious care of one of Joram's daughters, who was wife to Jehoiada the priest, who stole away one of the king's sons, Joash by name, and hid him. V2:3. This was a brand plucked out of the fire. What number were slain we are not told, but it seems this being a child in the nurse's arms was not missed, or not inquired after, or at least no found. The person that delivered him was his own aunt, the daughter of wicked Joram, for God will raise up protectors for those whom he will have protected. The place of his safety was the house of the Lord, one of the chambers belonging to the temple, a place Athaliah seldom troubled. His aunt, by bringing him hither, put him under God's special protection, and so hid him by faith, as Moses was hidden. Now were David's words made good to one of his seed. PS 27:5, in the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. With good reason did this Joash, when he grew up, set himself to repair the house of the Lord, for it had been a sanctuary to him. Now was the promise made to David bound up in one life, and yet it did not fail. Thus to the son of David will God, according to his promise, secure a spiritual seed, which, though sometimes reduced to a small number, brought very low and seemingly lost, will be perpetuated to the end of time, hidden sometimes and unseen, but hidden in God's pavilion and unhurt. It was a special providence that Joram, though a king, a wicked king, married his daughter to Jehoiada, a priest, a godly priest. Some perhaps thought it a disparagement to the royal family to marry a daughter to a clergyman, but it proved a happy marriage, and the saving of the royal family from ruin, for Jehoiada's interest in the temple gave her an opportunity to preserve the child, and her interest in the royal family gave him an opportunity to set him on the throne. See the wisdom and care of providence, and how it prepares for what it designs, and see what blessings those lay up in store for their families that marry their children to those that are wise and good. For in the 7th year Jehoiada sent and fetched the rulers over hundreds, with the captains and the guard, and brought them to him into the house of the Lord, and made a covenant with them, and took an oath of them in the house of the Lord, and showed them the king's son. 5. And he commanded them, saying, This is the thing that ye shall do. A third part of you that enter in on the Sabbath shall even be keepers of the watch of the king's house. 6. And a third part shall be at the gate of Sur, and a third part at the gate behind the guard. So shall you keep the watch of the house, that it be not broken down. 7. And 2 parts of all you that go forth on the Sabbath, even they shall keep the watch of the house of the Lord about the king. 8. And ye shall compass the king round about, every man with his weapons in his hand. And he that cometh within the ranges, let him be slain, and be ye with the king as he goeth out and as he cometh in. 9. And the captains over the hundreds did according to all things that Jehoiada the priest commanded. And they took every man his men that were to come in on the Sabbath, with them that should go out on the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. 10. And to the captains over hundreds did the priest give King David spears and shields, that were in the temple of the Lord. 11. And the guard stood, every man with his weapons in his hand, round about the king, from the right corner of the temple to the left corner of the temple, along by the altar and the temple. 12. And he brought forth the king's son, and put the crown upon him, and gave him the testimony. And they made him king, and anointed him, and they clapped their hands, and said, God save the king. 6 years Athaliah tyrannized. We have not a particular account of her reign. No doubt it was of a piece with the beginning. While Jehu was extirpating the worship of Baal in Israel, she was establishing it in Judah, as appears, 2 Chron 24:7. The court and kingdom of Judah had been debauched by their alliance with the house of Ahab, and now one of that house is a curse and a plague to both. Sinful friendships speed no better. All this while, Joash lay hid, entitled to a crown and intended for it, and yet buried alive in obscurity. Though the sons and heirs of heaven are now hidden, the world knows them not. 1 John 3:1. Yet the time is fixed when they shall appear in glory, as Joash in his 7th year. By that time he was ready to be shown, not a babe, but having served his first apprenticeship to life and arrived at his first climacterical year, he had taken a good step towards manhood. By that time the people had grown weary of Athaliah's tyranny and ripe for a revolution. How that revolution was effected we are here told. The manager of this great affair was Jehoiada the priest, probably the high priest, or at least the Sagan, as the Jews called him, or suffragan to the high priest. By his birth and office he was a man in authority, whom the people were bound by the law to observe and obey, especially when there was no rightful king upon the throne, Dut 17:12. By marriage he was allied to the royal family, and if all the seed royal were destroyed, his wife, as daughter to Joram, had a better title to the crown than Athaliah had. By his eminent gifts and graces he was fitted to serve his country, and better service he could not do it than to free it from Athaliah's usurpation. And we have reason to think he did not make this attempt till he had first asked counsel of God and known his mind, either by prophets or Urim, perhaps by both. 2. The management was very discreet, and as became so wise and good a man as Jehoiada was. 1. He concerted the matter with the rulers of hundreds and the captains, the men in office, ecclesiastical, civil, and military. He got them to him to the temple, consulted with them, laid before them the grievances they at present labored under, gave them an oath of secrecy, and, finding them free and forward to join with him, showed them the king's son, v. 4, and so well satisfied were they with his fidelity that they saw no reason to suspect an imposition. We may well think what a pleasing surprise it was to the good people among them, who feared that the house and lineage of David were quite cut off, to find such a spark as this in the embers. 2. He posted the priests and Levites, who were more immediately under his direction, in the several avenues to the temple, to keep the guard, putting them under the command of the rulers of hundreds, v. 9. David had divided the priests into courses, which waited by turns. Every Sabbath day morning a new company came into waiting, but the company of the foregoing week did not go out of waiting till the Sabbath evening, so that on the Sabbath day, when double service was to be done, there was a double number to do it, both those that were to come in and those that were to go out. These Jehoiada employed to attend on this great occasion. He armed them out of the magazines of the temple with David's spears and shields, either his own or those he had taken from his enemies, which he devoted to God's honor, v. 10. If they were old and unfashionable, yet those that used them might, by their being David's, be reminded of God's covenant with him, which they were now acting in the defense of. 2 things they were ordered to do. A. 1. To protect the young king from being insulted, they must keep the watch of the king's house, v. 5. Compass the king, and be with him, v. 8. to guard him from Athaliah's partisans, for still there were those that thirsted after royal blood. 2. To preserve the holy temple from being profaned by the concourse of people that would come together on this occasion. 6. Keep the watch of the house, that it be neither broken through nor broken down, and so strangers should crowd in, or such as were unclean. He was not so zealous for the projected revolution as to forget his religion. In times of the greatest hurry care must be taken, ne detrimentum capiat ecclesia euro, that the holy things of God be not trenched upon. It is observable that Jehoiada appointed to each his place as well as his work. 6, 7. For good order contributes very much to the expediting and accomplishing of any great enterprise. Let every man know and keep and make good his post, and then the work will be done quickly. 3. When the guards were fixed, then the king was brought forth. 12. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Shaun, for even in thy holy mountain thy king appears, a child indeed, but not such a one as brings a woe upon the land. For he is the son of nobles, the son of David. Eccle 10:17. A child indeed, but he had a good guardian, and, which was better, a good God to go to. Jehoiada, without delay, proceeded to the coronation of this young king, for, though he was not yet capable of dispatching business, he would be growing up towards it by degrees. This was done with great solemnity. 12. 1. In token of his being invested with kingly power, he put the crown upon him, though it was yet too large and heavy for his head. The regalia, it is probable, were kept in the temple, and so the crown was ready at hand. 2. In token of his obligation to govern by law, and to make the word of God his rule, he gave him the testimony, put into his hand a Bible, in which he must read all the days of his life. Dut 17:18, 19. 3. In token of his receiving the Spirit, to qualify him for this great work to which he before was called, he anointed him. Though notice is taken of the anointing of the kings only in case of interruption, as here, and in Solomon's case, yet I know not but the ceremony might be used for all their kings, at least those of the house of David, because their royalty was typical of Christ's, who was to be anointed above his fellows, above all the sons of David. 4. In token of the people's acceptance of him and subjection to his government, they clapped their hands for joy and expressed their hearty good wishes to him. Let the king live, and thus they made him king, made him their king, consented to and concurred with the divine appointment. They had reason to rejoice in the period now put to Athaliah's tyranny, and the prospect they had of the restoration and establishment of religion by a king under the tuition of so good a man as Jehoiada. They had reason to bid him welcome to the crown whose right it was, and to pray, let him live, concerning him who came to them as life from the dead, and in whom the house of David was to live. With such acclamations of joy and satisfaction must the kingdom of Christ be welcomed into our hearts when his throne is set up there, and Satan the usurper is deposed. Hosanna, blessed is he that comes. Clap hands, and say, let King Jesus live, forever live and reign in my soul, and in all the world. It is promised, PS 72:15, he shall live, and prayer shall be made for him, and his kingdom continually. 13. And when Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, she came to the people into the temple of the Lord. 14. And when she looked, behold, the king stood by a pillar, as the manner was, and the princes and the trumpeters by the king, and all the people of the land rejoiced, and blew with trumpets. And Athaliah rent her clothes, and cried, treason, treason. 15. But Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of the hundreds, the officers of the host, and said unto them, have her forth without the ranges, and him that followeth her kill with the sword. For the priest had said, let her not be slain in the house of the Lord. 16. And they laid hands on her, and she went by the way by the which the horses came into the king's house, and there was she slain. We may suppose it was designed, when they had finished the solemnity of the king's inauguration, to pay a visit to Athaliah, and call her to an account for her murders, usurpation, and tyranny. But, like her mother Jezebel, she saved them the labor, went out to meet them, and hastened her own destruction. 1. Hearing the noise, She came in a fright to see what was the matter. V. 13. Jehoiada and his friends began in silence, but now that they found their strength, they proclaimed what they were doing. It seems Athaliah was little regarded, else she would have had intelligence brought her of this daring attempt before with her own ears she heard the noise. Had the design been discovered before it was perfected, it might have been quashed, but now it was too late. When she heard the noise, it was strange that she was so ill-advised as to come herself, and, for aught that appears, to come alone. Surely she was not so neglected as to have none to go for her, or none to go with her, but she was wretchedly infatuated by the transport both of fear and indignation she was in. Whom God will destroy, he befalls. 2. Seeing what was done, she cried out for help. She saw the king's place by the pillar possessed by one to whom the princes and people did homage, v. 14, and had reason to conclude her power at an end, which she knew was usurped. This made her rend her clothes, like one distracted, and cry, "Treason! Treason! Come and help against the traitors." Josephus adds that she cried to have him killed that possessed the king's place. What was now doing was the highest justice, yet it was branded as the highest crime. She herself was the greatest traitor, and yet was first and loudest in crying treason. Treason. Those that are themselves most guilty are commonly most forward to reproach others. 3. Jehoiada gave orders to put her to death as an idolater, a usurper, and an enemy to the public peace. Care was taken, 1. That she should not be killed in the temple, or any of the courts of it, in reverence to that holy place, which must not be stained with the blood of any human sacrifice, though ever so justly offered. 2. That whoever appeared for her should die with her, him that follows her, to protect or rescue her, any of her attendants that resolve to adhere to her and will not come into the interests of their rightful sovereign, kill with the sword. But not unless they follow her now, v. 15. According to these orders, she endeavoring to make her escape the back way to the palace, through the stalls, they pursued her, and there killed her, v. 16. So let thy enemies perish, O Lord. Thus give the bloody harlot blood to drink, for she is worthy. 17. And Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they should be the Lord's people, between the king also and the people. 18. And all the people of the land went into the house of Baal, and brake it down. His altars and his images brake they in pieces thoroughly, and slew Mattan the priest of Baal before the altars. And the priest appointed officers over the house of the Lord. 19. And he took the rulers over hundreds, and the captains, and the guard, and all the people of the land. And they brought down the king from the house of the Lord, and came by the way of the gate of the guard to the king's house. And he sat on the throne of the kings. 20. And all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was in quiet, and they slew Athaliah with the sword beside the king's house. 21. 7 years old was Jehoash when he began to reign. Jehoiada had now got over the harlot part of his work, when, by the death of Athaliah, the young prince had his way to the throne cleared of all opposition. He had now to improve his advantages for the perfecting of the revolution and the settling of the government. 2 things we have an account of here, I. The good foundations he laid by an original contract, v. 17. Now that prince and people were together in God's house, as it should seem before they stirred, Jehoiada took care that they should jointly covenant with God, and mutually covenant with each other, that they might rightly understand their duty both to God and to one another, and be firmly bound to it. 1. He endeavored to settle and secure the interests of religion among them by a covenant between them and God. King and people would then cleave most firmly to each other when both had joined themselves to the Lord. God had already, on his part, promised to be their God. Jehoiada could show them that in the book of the testimony, now the king and people on their part must covenant and agree that they will be the Lord's people. In this covenant, the king stands upon the same level with his subjects and is as much bound as any of them to serve the Lord. By this engagement they renounced Baal, whom many of them had worshipped, and resigned themselves to God's government. It is well with the people when all the changes that pass over them help to revive, strengthen, and advance the interests of religion among them. And those are likely to prosper who set out in the world under fresh and sensible obligations to God and their duty. By our bonds to God, the bonds of every relation are strengthened. They first gave themselves to the Lord, and then to us. 2 Cor 8:5. 2. He then settled both the coronation oath and the oath of allegiance, the Pacta Conventiuro covenant, between the king and the people, by which the king was obliged to govern according to law and to protect his subjects, and they were obliged, while he did so, to obey him and to bear faith and true allegiance to him. Covenants are of use both to remind us of and to bind us to those duties which are already binding on us. It is good, in all relations, for the parties to understand one another fully, particularly in that between prince and subject, that the one may understand the limits of his power and prerogative, the other those of his liberty and property. And never may the ancient landmarks which our fathers have set before them be removed. 2. The good beginnings he raised on those foundations. 1. Pursuant to their covenant with God, they immediately abolished idolatry, which the preceding kings, in compliance with the house of Ahab, had introduced. 18. All the people of the land, the mob, got together to show their zeal against idolatry, and every one, now that they were so well-headed, would lend a hand to pull down Baal's temple, his altars, and his images. All his worshippers, it should seem, deserted him. Only his priest Mutton stuck to his altar. Though all men forsook Baal, he would not, and there he was slain, the best sacrifice that ever was offered upon that altar. Having destroyed Baal's temple, they appointed officers over the house of God, to see that the service of God was regularly performed by the proper persons in due time, and according to the institutional manner. 2. Pursuant to their covenant with one another, they expressed a mutual readiness to and satisfaction in each other. 1. The king was brought in state to the royal palace, and sat there on the throne of judgment, the thrones of the house of David. 19. Ready to receive petitions and appeals, which he would refer it to Jehoiada to give answers to and to give judgment upon. 2. The people rejoiced, and Jerusalem was in quiet. 20. And Josephus says they kept a feast of joy many days, making good Solomon's observation. Prov 11:10. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perish, there is shouting. Chapter 12. This chapter gives us the history of the reign of Joash, which does not answer to that glorious beginning of it which we had an account of in the foregoing chapter. He was not so illustrious at 40 years old as he was at 7. Yet his reign is to be reckoned one of the better sort, and appears much worse in Chronicles, 2 Chron 24, than it does here, for there we find the blood of one of God's prophets laid at his door. Here we are only told that he did well while Jehoiada lived, verse 1-3. 2. That he was careful and active to repair the temple, verse 4-16. 3. That after a mean compact with Hazael, version 17:18, he died ingloriously, verse 19-21. The reign of Joash, king of Judah, 878 BC. One in the 7th year of Jehoash began to reign, and 40 years reigned he in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. 2. And Jehoash did that which was right in the